Hello, this afternoon we're going to be stitching the second foot of this pair of Sam slippers in our biggest size, which is currently size 13 to 14. That's a US ladies 15 to 16. So we're going to be stitching in a pretty simple up and down stitch, and we'll make the other pair to this slipper. Right, let's get the parts. So the upper is knitted. It's knitted, we actually started here, knitted round here, and then down to the toe. So the last 8 stitches are to gather up for the toe. And it has 2 soles in this design. So we've got the charcoal sole, which has a bit of latex grip on it, which you can't really see, but you can kind of hear it. So that's for the bottom, so that'll go latex side down. And we've got the marmalade sole for the top. So we're going to start sewing at the toe, round to the heel, come back to the toe and back round to the other side, back to the heel. Right, let's get some thread. So I tend to take about 7 lengths of thread to go around. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's cut that. And thread our bodkin. So we always use a blunt bodkin for stitching soles. This means it won't go in the wrong place, it will only go through the holes. Well, it will if you force it, but it won't go through easily. So I'm going to start at the toe. So every sole has a little notch in the front, so we'll line those 2 notches up. We're actually going to bunch all the knitted stitches from the toe are going to be bunched up between the 2 centre holes. So I'll start here, pull about half my thread through, yep, bring the upper over, and for the very first stitch I'm actually going to thread the needle. This is a bit dark, but threading it through all those last 8 stitches. And back down the next hole. Right. So everything's still lined up. And I'm actually going to come back on myself, back 1 stitch, and I'm going to do that again through all the stitches, the knitted stitches, and back down that same hole. So they're firmly held in place. Right, so now we're going to start moving along. Move on 1 stitch, and we'll catch the very first row. So that's that stitch there, through the stitch, back down the same hole, pull the thread through and move on a stitch. Oops, I've gone off camera. And move on a stitch. Through that hole. Find the last stitch of the row, the next row. Back down the hole. Pull it tight. Move on a stitch. Look for the next row. It's quite easy to think you haven't done this one, but if you pull a bit you can see that's already done. So we're looking for the next stitch, which is this one here. And back down the same hole. Pull those nice and firm. And moving on a stitch. And pick up the next stitch, back down the same hole, move on a stitch, and it's this one here, and back down the same hole. Right, so we're going to keep doing that working all our way round until we get to the centre back, and we've got our little tag of thread to show us where the centre back should be. Okay, so now we're getting closer to the heel, and it can become a little bit less obvious which stitch goes where because we've got the garter stretchy panel for the back. We've got our tuft of yarn to show the centre back, so that's going to line up with the centre back of the heel here. So we'll just keep going round and keep an eye on that centre back. Whether I catch the stitch on the up or the down stitch doesn't really matter, as long as I just catch each stitch once. There we go. Let's see how we're looking. That's going to go there. So we'll have that one there, that one there, that one there, that one there, that one there. Okay. So this one, this one, this one, and this one will go to centre back, so it's going to be this one. I'm going to move that little tuft out of the way. It's done its job. There, oops. Hit the camera. That's better. Right, we'll just leave that tail for now and head back to the toe end. Now we're going to work along this other side, and it'll all line up and our slip will be complete. Next stitch. So we're getting nearer to the end, and you might be wondering what happens where there's that join between the back section and the front section. Well, it actually only amounts to half a stitch. So if we see here, they're pointing this direction, and suddenly there's an extra half stitch pointing that direction. So I think we've arrived at that step point. We're really not going to see it. Just keep taking the very last stitch of each row. So we're getting really close to the end now. So look at which stitch is going to go where. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I think we've got maybe one extra stitch on the top. We'll lose that when we get to the garter stitch section. My thread's nearly run out. I've actually got a longer tail on the other end. So I'm going to switch the needle to that end and use that piece of thread. So we'll get the next bit there. Down. Let's unpick a couple of those stitches. Just give me a bit longer thread for finishing off. So it doesn't really matter where you start and finish. I'd always start at the toe. You want the toe to be in the right place. You've got your marker for the centre heel. but in terms of where the threads finishes off, it's really immaterial. So we want that stitch on there, stitch in here, this one. I'm going to take that thread into the middle between the two layers. Right, this one, I'm going to take it and do its last stitch. Let's check we've got those. Yeah, it's all picked up, so I'm just going to take that through there. So they're both in between the two layers, and I'm going to do several knots, nice tight knots. So I'm not sure if this is a granny knot, reef knot, bit of both, doesn't really matter, just 3 or 4 knots together. Trim those ends to the same length, thread the needle with both threads, pretty easy because they're waxed. There we go. And then we're just going to poke it down inside, pull it through on the other side. Fish those tails out, where are they? Back a couple of stitches and another long stitch. On that will secure the ends very thoroughly, and you need to secure them well because the thread's waxed. Any knots just love to come undone. There we go. Thread disappears in there, no one's ever going to see that. You've got nice even stitching all the way around. Don't see the stitching on the top. You can see how the knit row follows neatly right the way through on both sides. And there you are, slippers ready to put on. So here we have the pair of Sam slippers finished. Nice seam-free upper. The only stitching is to attach the soles. Felt inside. Washable as wool, nice gentle wash. Don't tumble dry them.